I'd like to wish all of Wall Street a very merry lose all your money. Hey guys, welcome back to Sleepless Tales. Today we'll be continuing with Demian by Herman Hesse. You already know the deal. We're starting on chapter VI, which means 6. I don't know if you know that. Probably 2/3 way done this book, so getting there, guys. It's gotten very esoteric recently. I should have done. I think I'm on the next part of this. I'm splitting this chapter into 2 parts. On the next part of this, I'll go through a full, quick touchback on the last 2 chapters, discuss it, because this book is just all over the place sometimes. It's really jumping through hoops. Who knows what this one will be. Chapter 6 is called Jacob and the Angel. So, who's Jacob, right? Anyways, Sleepless Tales, guys. Don't forget to like, comment, favorite, and subscribe. And let's get into the reading. All right. Chapter 6. Jacob and the Angel. It is impossible to recount briefly what I learned from the eccentric musician about Abraxas. The most important thing was that it meant to step forward in the progress to self-knowledge. I was at that time an unusual youth for my 18 years, precocious in 100 ways, immature and helpless in 100 others. When, on occasion, I compared myself with other people, I sometimes felt proud and conceited, but often I was depressed and mortified. I had often regarded myself as a genius, but no less often as half-mad. I could not successfully join in the life and pleasures of my fellows, and I had frequently been consumed with self-reproach and anxiety, as if separated from them. I was beyond hope, as if I was debarred from life. Pistorius, who himself was a grown-up eccentric, taught me how to maintain my courage and self-respect, my continually finding some value in my words, dreams, and fancies, and always talking and discussing them seriously. He set me an example. "You told me that you love music, because it has nothing to do with morality," he said. "That's my view too, but you shouldn't beware of turning into a moralist. You shouldn't make comparisons between yourself and other people. If nature created you a bat, you must not try and make yourself into an ostrich. You often look upon yourself as a special case. You propose to follow different ways from the majority. That you must unlearn. Look into the fire, gaze into the clouds, and as soon as the presentiments come to you and the voices within you begin to speak, surrender to them. Do not merely ask whether what you're doing suits your teacher, your father, this or that. Good God, that's the way to self-destruction. That would be the pedestrian way, becoming a fossil. Our God, my dear Sinclair, is called Abraxas, and he is both God and devil. He contains in himself the world of light and the world of darkness. Abraxas has nothing to object to in any of your thoughts or any of your dreams. Always remember that. But once you become faultless and normal, he abandons you in favor of a new vessel into which he can pour his thoughts. Among all my dreams, the dark dream of love was the most constant. I was always dreaming that I was entering our old house under the heraldic bird. I advanced to embrace my mother. She would turn out to be the large, half-male, half-maternal woman who filled me with awe and for whom I felt the most violent attraction. I could never bring myself to recount this dream to my friend. I withheld it when I had revealed everything else to him. It was my private corner, my secret, my escape. When I was depressed, I asked Pistorius to play me old Buxteude's Passacaglia. In the dark church in the evening, I would sit lost in this strange, self-contained music. Music which existed for itself, and in its own right. It did me good to hear it, made me more ready to heed my own inner voice. Sometimes we stayed for a long time, sitting in the church, after he had finished playing the organ, and watched the daylight shining feebly and losing itself in the high Gothic windows. It seems comic to think that I was once a theological student, and nearly went into the church, said Pistorius. But I was only committing an error, in form at that time. It is my aim and vocation to be a priest. I was satisfied too early in life, however, and put myself at Jehovah's disposal before I knew Abraxas. Every religion has its own beauty. Religion is soul. It's all one whether you take part in Christian communion or make a pilgrimage to Mecca. You could have become a pastor then, I said. No, Sinclair. I could not have been true to myself. Our religion is worn out, as if it had ceased to be a religion and had become a purely intellectual matter. I could possibly become a Roman Catholic, but a Protestant priest? Never. The few true believers, I know some, stick closely to the literal interpretation. I could not say to them that Christ is not a person, as far as I am concerned, but a hero. A myth, a vast shadow picture in which humanity sees itself projected onto the walls of eternity. And the others who attend church to hear a well-turned sermon, to fulfill a duty, so as to leave no stone unturned, and so forth. What would I have to say to them? Convert them, do you think? But I have no desire to do that. The priest does not want to convert. All he wants is to live among believers, among his own brethren, and be an instrument and expression of the feeling out of which man makes his gods. He paused and then continued. Our new belief, for which we chose the name Abraxas, is a good one, my dear friend. It is the best we have, but it is still not yet weaned. It hasn't yet grown its wings. Unfortunately, a solitary religion is still not the true one. It must first be enjoyed in common. It must have a cult, its ecstasy, its feast, and its miseries. He was lost in thought. Can't one also experience mysteries alone, or in a very limited circle? I asked hesitantly. One can indeed. He nodded his assent. I have long been doing so. I have practiced cults for which I should have to spend years in prison if it was known. But I know it's still not yet the right one. Suddenly, he clapped me on the shoulder, and I shrank back. Young man, he said earnestly, you have your own mysteries. I know you must have dreams which you hide from me. I do not want to know them, but I do say this. Live them. These dreams are yours, and act them out. Direct altars to them. It will still not be the entire solution, but it is a way. Time alone will show whether you and I and a handful of others will renew the world. We must renew ourselves every day. Otherwise, it'll be hopeless. And think about it. You're 18 years old. You don't chase after women in the streets. You must have dreams and wishes of love. Perhaps they're the kind that frighten you, but don't be afraid. They're the best you have. Believe me, I have lost a great deal by doing violence to my dreams of love when I was your age. You shouldn't. When you know about Abraxas, you cannot persist in that attitude. One should be fearless and consider nothing forbidden that our soul craves for. Shocked, I interposed. But you can't do everything that comes into your head. You can't do away with a person because he's hostile to you. He stepped closer to me. In certain circumstances, even that. In most cases, however, it's merely an error. Nor do I mean that you should simply do whatever goes through your mind. No. But you should not spoil those ideas, which have their good aspect, by rejecting them and moralizing about them. Instead of nailing yourself or someone else to the cross, you can drink from a chalice in solemn mood and reflect on the mystery of sacrifice. And even without all this, it is possible to treat one's actions and so-called temptations with love and respect. Then they will reveal their meaning, and they all have a meaning. If something that seems quite mad or sinful enters your head in the future, should you feel like murdering someone or committing some enormity, remember for a moment that it is Abraxas at work in your imagination. The person you wish to murder is never Mr. So-and-so. He's only a disguise. When we hate someone, we are hating something that is within ourselves, in his image. We are never stirred up by something which does not already exist within us. Pistorius had never said anything which had a deeper effect upon me. I could not reply. What had moved me most, and in the strangest way, was the similarity of the exoneration to Demian's words. which I'd been carrying around with me for years. They knew nothing of each other, and yet both had given me the same message. The things we see, said Pistorius gently, are the things which are already inside us. There is no reality beyond what we have inside us. That is why most people live such unreal lives. They take pictures outside themselves, for the real ones, and fail to express their own world. One can, of course, live contentedly enough in that situation, but once you know about the other, you no longer have the choice of following the majority way. The way of the majority, Sinclair. It's easy. Ours is hard. But now we must go. And some days later, after twice waiting for him in vain, he came swaying along round a street corner in the cold night wind. He was reeling along, quite drunk. I felt no wish to call after him. He went past me with shining, bewildered eyes, as if he was answering some dark call from the unknown. I followed him along a street. He moved as if he had been drawn along by an invisible thread. His gait was fantastic, yet somehow free, as if he were a ghost. I returned home gloomily to my unsolved dreams. So that's how the world is renewed, I thought, and felt at the same instant that such a reflection was unworthy and sententious. After all, what did I know about his dreams? Perhaps the path he trod in his drunkenness was surer than the tentative one that I trod. Sometimes in the breaks between the lessons, a fellow pupil to whom I had never paid any previous attention seemed anxious to talk to me. He was small, delicate, and puny individual with lank red hair, and he had something odd about his mien and deportment. One evening, when I went home, he watched out for me in the lane to allow me to pass by. Then he pursued me and posted himself in front of our door. Do you want something from me? I asked. Only to speak to you, he ventured shyly. Would you mind walking a few yards with me? I followed him and sensed that he was very excited and full of expectancy. His hands trembled. Are you a spiritualist? He asked quite suddenly. No, Nauer, I laughed. Not a bit. What makes you think so? But you're a theosophist. No, not that either. Don't be so secretive. I'm quite sure that there's something special about you. I can read it in your eyes. I'm quite convinced that you're in communication with the spirit's world. I'm not asking out of curiosity, Sinclair. I'm just a seeker, and I am so alone. Let's hear about it, I encouraged him. I know absolutely nothing about spirits. I live in my own dreams. That's what you have felt about me. Others live in dreams, but not in their own. That's the difference. Yes. Perhaps that's it, he murmured. It's just a question of what kind of dreams you live in. Have you ever heard of white magic? I cannot claim to have done so. It's white magic when you learn to regulate your own life. Then you can become immortal and do magic too. Have you ever indulged in experiments of that kind? At first he was reluctant to answer my inquisitive questions about these practices until I turned to move away. Then he unburdened himself about the whole thing. For example, I myself practice that kind of magic when I want to go to sleep or concentrate. I just think of something, a word or a name of, for instance, of the geometric figure. I think about it as hard as I can and try to think it inside my brain until I feel that I've become part of it. Then I think it into my neck, and so on until the idea has taken complete possession of me. Then I am, so to speak, set, and nothing else can rouse me from my peace of mind. I had a vague idea of what he meant, but I realized that he had something else on his mind, for he was curiously excited and restless. I tried to be tactful with any questions, and before long he asked his own. Are you still continent? He asked me nervously. In what sense? Do you mean sexually? Yes. I've been continent now for 2 years. since I learned by experience. Before that, I was depraved, but you know that. Haven't you ever had a woman then? No, I said. I haven't found the right one. But you did find one you considered the right one. If you did, would you go to bed with her? Yes, of course, if she herself had nothing against it, I said with faint irony. Oh, then you're on the wrong road. You can only develop your inner resources if you stay completely continent. That's what I've done now for 2 whole years. 2 years, little more than a month. It is so difficult. Very often I can't hold out any longer. Listen to me, Nauer. I don't believe continency is all that important. I know that's what they all say, he objected, but I didn't expect that from you. Whoever wants to follow the spiritual path must keep absolutely pure. It's all right. Do so. But I fail to understand why the person who represses his sexual desires should be considered any purer than anyone else. Can you exclude the sexual element from every thought and dream? He gave me a look of despair. No, indeed no. Heavens, yet it seems inevitable. I have dreams at night that I could not even tell myself. Fearful dreams. I recalled what Pistorius had told me, but, however, much I felt his words to be true, I was unable to pass them on. I found it impossible to perform any advice which did not emanate from my own personal experience, unless I felt able to follow it myself. I was silent and felt humiliated that someone should ask advice of me when I had none to give. I've tried everything, moaned Nauer. I've done everything that can be done with cold water, snow, exercise, and running, but it's no use. I wake up every night from dreams which I had no right to dream, and the dreadful thing is that I gradually lose grip of the spiritual progress I've already made. I find it almost impossible to concentrate or lull myself to sleep again. I often lie awake the whole night. I can never hold out long. When I finally have to give myself up to the struggle, yield and make myself impure again, I am even more despicable than all the others who haven't ever had to fight. Can you understand that? I nodded, but did not know what to say. He was beginning to bore me, and I was afraid of myself because I could not feel very deeply impressed by his despair. And all I felt was, I can't help you. Then you can't tell me anything to help, he said finally, sad and exhausted. Absolutely nothing. But there must be a way. How do you manage? I can't say, Nauer. We can't help anybody else. No one was able to help me. You must rely on yourself, and then do what comes to you from within. There's no other way. If you can't find the way to yourself, you won't find any spirits either, I'm sure. Disappointed and suddenly bereft of speech, the little chap looked at me. Then a sudden gleam of hatred entered his eyes, and he grimaced and shrieked. You're a fine saint. You've got your secret vice, too. You play the wise man, and secretly you cling to the same dirt as I do, everybody else. You're swine, like me. We're all of us swine. I went off and left him standing there. He took 2 or 3 steps after me, hesitated, turned round, and ran off. I felt ill, with mixed feelings of disgust and sympathy, and I was unable to rid myself of this nausea until I had arranged my few pictures round me in my little room and given up to my private dreams with intense fervor. Then, my dream returned at once. Our gateway and the coat of arms, my mother and the strange woman, whose features I saw with such a preternatural clarity that I was able to draw her portrait from memory the same evening. When this drawing was completed a few days later, and had been painted in almost unconsciously during the odd 10 minutes in between times, I hung it on my wall the same evening, pushed the study lamp in front of it, and stood before it, as before a spirit with whom I had to fight it out. The face was similar to the previous one, similar to my old friend Demian, in some ways resembled me. One eye was perceptibly higher than the other, and her glance looked over and beyond me with a fateful stare. I stood before her, and the nervous strain made my blood run cold. I questioned the picture, accused it, caressed it, prayed to it, called it mother, sweetheart, whore, strumpet. I called it Abraxas. Meantime, sayings of Pistorius, were they Demians? Came into my head. I could not recall when they had been uttered, but I imagined I could hear them again. They were remarks about Jacob wrestling with the angel of God, and his, "I will not let thee go, except thou bless me." The painted face in the lamplight changed at every utterance I made. Light and shining, dark and sinister. Livid lids closed over glazed eyes, which opened again and darted loving glances. It was woman, man, girl, small child, animal, then it melted away to a small speck, grew large and clear again. At length, I yielded to the strong impulse to shut my eyes, and now saw the image within myself, more vivid and powerful than ever. I wanted to prostrate myself before it, but it was so much part of me that I was unable to leave it, and as if it had just turned into me myself. Then I heard a dark, thunderous roar, as though from a spring storm, and I trembled in an indescribably novel feeling of fear and misadventure. Stars flashed before my eyes and were extinguished. Memories which went back to forgotten infancy, nay, pre-existence, and the first stages of being hurried past me. But the memories which seemed to rehearse my whole life in its deepest intimacy did not stop with the past and present. They went further, mirrored the future, tore me away from the present into new forms of life, whose images were fantastically clear and dazzling, though I was unable to recapture a single one later. In the night, I awoke out of my profound sleep. I was still dressed and lay diagonally across the bed. I switched on the light and felt I must remember something important, but could recall nothing of the hours that had passed. I lit the lamp. The memory gradually returned. I looked for the picture of it. No longer hung on the wall. It was not on the table either. Then I had a vague feeling that I had burned it. Or had I merely dreamed that? Had I merely dreamed that I had burnt it in my hands and eaten the ashes? A great restlessness seized hold of me. I put on my hat and strode out through the house and along the lane as if I were driven by some outward force. Ran on and on through the streets and across squares as though blown by gusts of wind. Listened by the dark churches of my friend, blindly seeking for something without knowing what it was. I passed through a suburb where there were brothels that had a light here and there in the windows. Farther out still stood some new buildings and piles of bricks partially covered by gray-colored snow. As I wandered like a somnambulist, under the influence of this strange impulse, I noticed the new building of my hometown. It was there that my tormentor, Cromer, had taken me for our first financial settlement. A similar building lay before me in the gray night, yawned at me with its gaping door. It drew me in. I had no choice, and I advanced, stumbling over heaps of sand and rubbish. The urge was irresistible. I had to enter. I staggered into the dreary room over planks and broken bricks. It smelt depressingly of damp cold and stones. There was a heap of sand, a light stain of gray. All the rest was dark. Then a voice cried out in terror, "For God's sake, Sinclair, where have you come from?" And a figure rose out of the darkness. A small, lean fellow, like a ghost. My hair stood on end. I recognized him. My schoolmate, Nauer. "How do you come to be here?" he asked, almost mad with emotion. "How did you manage to find me?" I did not understand what he meant. "I wasn't searching for you," I said, dazed. Every word I said cost me an effort and was forced warily through my heavy, as if it were frozen, lips. He stared at me. "Not searching?" "No, I felt drawn here." "Did you call me?" "You must have called me." "What are you doing here then? It's night." He clasped me tightly in his thin arms. "Yes, night. It'll soon be morning. Oh, Sinclair, how wonderful that you haven't forgotten me. Can you forgive me then? What for? Oh dear, I was so odious. Only at this point did I recall our conversation. Had it occurred 4 or 5 days ago? It seemed a lifetime since then. But now suddenly, it all became clear. Not only what had happened between us, but why I had become hither, and what Naur had wanted to do out there. You intended to take your life then, Naur? He shivered with cold and fear. Yes, I intended to. I don't know whether I could have done so. I intended to wait until it was morning. I drew him out into the open air. The first horizontal streaks of dawn glimmered unbelievably cold and joyless in the gray air. I led the boy for a while by the arm. I heard myself say, "Now go home. Don't say a word to anyone. You've been treading the wrong path, the false path. We're not the swine you spoke of. We're human beings. We make gods and do battle with them, and they bless us." We walked on in silence and parted company. When I reached home, it was daylight. Min, that is the first part of chapter 6. No monologue here where I speak for 10 minutes. I think I'm just gonna